Have you ever noticed that as you've grown older, everyone still expects the same from you? The same availability, the same patience, the same willingness to put yourself last. But something feels different now, doesn't it? You can feel it in your bones, in those quiet moments when you're finally alone. You simply can't keep giving away pieces of yourself. Not anymore. Not at this stage of life. What if I told you that after 60, continuing to sacrifice your essential needs isn't just uncomfortable, it's unsustainable? That the generosity that defined your earlier decades might now be silently eroding your well-being? Today, we'll look into 8 things you can no longer afford to give up after 60. Not for your children, not for your spouse, not even for your closest friends. This isn't about becoming selfish. It's about survival. Emotional, mental, and yes, even physical. By the end of our time together, you'll understand exactly which boundaries need strengthening, which sacrifices need reconsidering, and most importantly, why protecting these 8 aspects of your life isn't optional anymore. It's necessary. You'll learn how to reclaim them with dignity, without guilt, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're doing what's right for your season of life. Before we continue, share in the comments. What's one thing you wish your children understood about getting older? If you've spent decades being the reliable one, the helper, the one who accommodates, this message is especially for you. The cost of continuing that pattern is simply too high now. To illustrate this, let me share a story that shows what I mean. Michael, 64, sits alone on the rooftop terrace of the downtown public library. The building hums quietly below. Soft footsteps, pages turning, city noise faint and distant. Up here, it's a different world. There are a few benches, some planters with flowers, and a metal railing that catches the golden light of late afternoon. Michael is hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees. He's not in a rush, but something in his body says he hasn't rested in years. On the far side of the terrace sits Walter, 79, a man with a newspaper folded beside him and a cup of coffee cooling on the ledge. He's been up there for a while, maybe an hour, maybe years. Walter has a composed presence and thoughtful gaze. His face carries the map of a life fully lived, with lines that speak of both joy and hardship. When he notices Michael's posture, the kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep, he speaks up. "Beautiful view up here, isn't it?" Walter says, his voice carrying gently across the space between them. Michael looks up, slightly startled. He hadn't noticed anyone else was there. "Yeah," he says with a small nod, "it is." A silence falls between them, not uncomfortable, just there. The kind of silence that happens between strangers who might not be strangers for long. "You look like you're carrying the weight of more than just today," Walter observes, his tone free of judgment. Michael doesn't answer right away. He looks out at the cityscape, the buildings catching the sunlight, shadows stretching longer as evening approaches. Eventually, he sighs. "Is it that obvious?" Walter chuckles softly. "Only to someone who's been there." Something in Walter's voice opens a door in Michael, and once he starts talking, it comes out fast. The pressure of being the one everyone counts on, the guilt when he wants time to himself, the loneliness that creeps in when the favors aren't returned. "It's like I'm expected to be available all the time," he says, the words tumbling out now. "My daughter calls with another crisis with the grandkids. My son needs help moving again. Friends want me to join their causes, committees, trips. My wife has a full social calendar planned for us both." He pauses, looking down at his hands. They're good hands, capable hands, hands that have helped countless people over the decades. "I don't know who I am when I'm not being useful to someone else," he admits quietly, "but lately I feel drained, like I'm expected to be available all the time. But I don't know who I'm being available for anymore." Walter nods, not with sympathy, with recognition. "I know that life," he says, I gave up too much for people who barely noticed. Michael looks at him with sudden interest. How did you change that? It wasn't easy, Walter admits, and it didn't happen overnight. But it started with recognizing what I couldn't afford to sacrifice anymore. He takes a sip of his coffee, looking reflective. There are things you can give up when you're younger. Energy, time, sometimes even dreams. And you bounce back. But after 60, the cost gets too high. Michael shifts on the bench, turning to face Walter more directly. Like what? Walter's eyes light up slightly, as if he's been waiting for someone to ask this very question for a long time. Would you like me to tell you about the 8 things I realized I couldn't give up anymore? Not if I wanted to truly live these later years, rather than just survive them. Michael nods, leaning forward slightly. His posture has changed. There's something like hope in it now, or at least curiosity. I would, actually. Walter sets his coffee cup down, settling in. Well, the first thing I had to reclaim was my mental space. Mental space, Michael repeats, not quite understanding. Yes, Walter says firmly. Everyone wants your attention, your opinion, your energy, your reaction. They want you to worry about their problems, remember their schedules, keep track of their lives. At some point, I forgot how to hear myself. Think. Michael's expression shifts to one of recognition. My phone never stops. Even when I ignore the calls, I feel guilty about it afterward. Exactly, Walter nods. And that guilt? That's the second thing I had to stop giving up. The freedom to say no without feeling like I'd committed a crime. A small smile tugs at Michael's lips. I'm not sure I remember what that feels like. For decades, Walter continues, I said, yes to favors, yes to family, yes to things that drained me to the point where I couldn't enjoy the things I actually wanted to do. The day I said no and didn't apologize, that was the day I felt 20 years younger. Michael laughs softly, but there's something wistful in it. That sounds liberating. It was, Walter agrees, but it was just the beginning. Walter takes a deep breath and looks directly at Michael. Now, let me explain what I mean by mental space. The first thing I had to reclaim. He gestures to his temple. Our minds are like rooms that have limited capacity. When we constantly fill them with other people's needs, worries, and expectations, there's no space left for our own thoughts, desires, or peace. Michael nods slowly, recognition in his eyes. After 60, Walter continues, your mental clarity becomes one of your most precious resources. You can't afford to squander it on constant availability to others. This isn't selfishness, it's self-preservation. He leans forward, his voice dropping slightly as if sharing a secret. I had to create rituals to protect my mental space. Morning. Hours became mine alone. No phone calls, no visitors, no obligations. Just me, my thoughts, and sometimes nothing at all. Was that difficult? Michael asks. Setting those boundaries. At first, absolutely, Walter admits. My daughter would call early because she knew I'd always been an early riser. Dad's always up. He won't mind, she'd say. Friends would text with their worries, expecting immediate responses because I'd always been reliable. He shakes his head, remembering. The hardest part wasn't creating the boundary, it was maintaining it without guilt. That took practice. What did you do? Michael asks, genuinely curious. I started small, Walter explains. I turned my phone off for 1 hour each morning, just 1 hour to start. Then I extended it gradually. I posted a note on my refrigerator that said mental space 6-9 a.m. to remind myself that this wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Michael smiles slightly. And did people respect it? Eventually, Walter chuckles, but not without some pushback. My son actually said, since when did you become so unavailable? As if my constant availability was somehow part of our contract. As father and son. He pauses, taking a sip of his now lukewarm coffee. But here's what happens when you reclaim your mental space. You become more present when you actually are with others. The constant mental fog of scattered attention lifts. You listen better, you respond more thoughtfully. You're not half somewhere else, mentally checking your endless to-do list for others. Michael nods thoughtfully. I can see that. I'm rarely fully present anymore. My mind is always racing to the next thing I need to do for someone. Exactly, Walter says with conviction. And at our age, presence isn't a luxury. It's how we fully experience what time we have left. Don't give that up. He sets his cup down firmly. Try this. Start with 30 minutes. Just 30 minutes each day where your mental space is entirely yours. No phone, no planning for others, no worrying about someone else's problems. See how it feels. Michael considers this, nodding slowly. I think I could manage that. Good, Walter says with satisfaction. Now let me tell you about the second thing I couldn't afford to give up anymore, the power to say no. Walter shifts slightly on the bench, getting comfortable. For most of my life, saying yes was my default response. Someone needed help? Yes. A favor? Yes. My time when I was exhausted? Still yes. He looks at Michael pointedly. Sound familiar? Michael laughs softly. Too familiar. I thought saying yes made me kind, generous, valuable, Walter continues. But after 60, I realized something important. Saying yes to everything meant saying no to myself, my health, my peace, my own priorities. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. Continuing, he leans back, his expression turning serious. The day I turned 68, my daughter called. She wanted me to babysit her 3 children, all under 10, for an entire weekend while she and her husband went to a work retreat. I'd done it many times before. Walter pauses, letting the tension build slightly. But this time I had just gotten over a bout of pneumonia. I was still tired. My doctor had warned me about pushing too hard. And I just knew that a weekend of chasing after energetic children would set my recovery back by weeks. What did you do? Michael asks, leaning forward. I took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry, but no. I can't do it this time. Michael's eyebrows raise slightly. How did she take it? Walter smiles ruefully. Not well, initially. There was a pause, then the guilt trip began. But Dad, we've had this planned for months. We're counting on you. The kids are so excited to see you. He shakes his head. And in that moment, I felt that familiar tug, the pull to sacrifice my needs for someone else's convenience. But then I thought about what my doctor said, about how exhausted I still felt, and I held firm. I'm sorry, but I'm still recovering. I just can't do it this time. Did that work? Michael asks. Eventually, Walter nods. She was disappointed, but she found another solution. And do you know what the most remarkable thing was? The world didn't end. Our relationship didn't crumble. And I recovered properly without a setback. Walter leans forward, his voice earnest. That's when I realized saying no isn't a rejection of the other person. It's an acknowledgement of your own limits. And after 60, those limits aren't negotiable anymore. I struggle with that, Michael admits. The guilt is overwhelming. Sometimes, that's because we were taught that our value lies in our utility to others, Walter says. But think about it this way. What happens when you consistently ignore your own needs and limits? Michael considers this. I guess you burn out, get sick, become resentful. Exactly, Walter points at him. And is a resentful, exhausted, ill person truly able to be present for the people they care about? Is that really serving anyone? Michael shakes his head. No, I suppose not. So in a way, Walter continues, learning to say no is actually an act of kindness, both to yourself and ultimately to others. You're preserving your health and goodwill so that when you do say yes, it comes from a place of genuine desire, not obligation. Walter's expression softens. Start small. Practice saying, let me think about it and get back to you, instead of an immediate yes. Give yourself permission to check in with your own needs first. Michael nods, taking this in. That seems Possible? More than possible, Walter assures him. Necessary. Walter stretches slightly, adjusting his position. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the rooftop terrace now, and the city below continues its steady hum. Now, the third thing I couldn't afford to give up anymore might surprise you, Walter says. It seems so basic, and yet we sacrifice it constantly. Sleep. Michael smiles skeptically. Sleep? Really? Don't dismiss it, Walter warns, his tone serious. Think about how often you've cut your rest short to accommodate someone else's schedule or needs. The early morning phone call you take even though it woke you. Staying up late to help with someone's crisis. Pushing through fatigue because they're counting on you. Michael's smile fades as recognition dawns. Almost every day, he admits. After 60, Walter continues, sleep isn't just about feeling rested. It's about brain health, emotional regulation, physical recovery. When we shortchange our sleep, we're literally shortening our lives and diminishing their quality. He leans forward. There was a period when my grandson was having trouble at school. My daughter would call me late at night, sometimes past 11, to process her worries. I'd listen for an hour, sometimes more, offering comfort and advice. Walter shakes his head. I was exhausted constantly. My blood pressure started rising. I became forgetful, irritable. The doctor actually asked if I was experiencing unusual stress. What did you do? Michael asks. I had to have a difficult conversation, Walter says. I told my daughter I love you and I'm here for you, but I need to be asleep by 10 to stay healthy. Can we talk earlier in the day? It wasn't easy. She was hurt at first, but eventually she understood. Walter's expression is firm. You see, at our age, adequate sleep isn't negotiable. It's medicine. You wouldn't skip a critical medication to please someone else, would you? Michael shakes his head. Then don't skip the sleep your body and mind require, Walter says simply. Set a sleep schedule that works for you. Protect it fiercely. Let the people in your life know this boundary exists for your health. Michael looks thoughtful. My wife likes to stay up late watching TV, and she's always unhappy if I go to bed earlier. Is her momentary unhappiness worth your long-term health? Walter asks gently. Perhaps there's a compromise. Separate bedrooms, headphones for her TV, or simply an understanding that different sleep needs aren't personal rejections. Michael nods slowly. That makes sense. Sleep is non-negotiable, Walter repeats firmly. Start treating it that way. He takes a final sip of his now cold coffee and sets the cup aside decisively. Which brings me to the fourth thing I couldn't afford to give up anymore. Privacy and personal space. What does that mean exactly? Michael asks. Walter gestures to the rooftop around them. Notice where we're sitting, a public space, yet there's distance between us and others. We have room to talk, to think, to simply be. Privacy isn't about secrecy. It's about having physical and emotional space that belongs only to you. His expression grows serious. As we age, especially after 60, this becomes crucial. Yet many of us find our personal space increasingly invaded, often by the people closest to us. Michael tilts his head. How so? Adult children who drop by unannounced because dad's always home anyway, Walter begins. Grandchildren who have no sense of boundaries because grandpa's house is everyone's house. Spouses who expect to share every moment, every thought, every activity because what else do you have to do now? He leans back, his gaze distant. I love my family deeply, but after decades of sharing my space, my time, my resources, I found myself with no sanctuary, no place that was truly mine. I can relate to that, Michael says quietly. Sometimes I just want to sit in silence, but there's always someone who needs something. Exactly, Walter nods. And it's not just physical space, it's emotional privacy too. The right to keep some thoughts to yourself, to process feelings without immediately sharing them, to make decisions without committee approval. He smiles, slightly. I had to reclaim this gradually. First, I converted a small room in my house into what I called my study. Nothing fancy, just a comfortable chair, some books, a small desk. I made it clear that when the door was closed, I wasn't to be disturbed unless it was genuinely urgent. Did that work? Michael asks. Not at first, Walter admits. There were constant emergencies that were actually just impatience. Dad, where do you keep the extra towels? Or Grandpa, can I have a snack? Through the closed door, he chuckles. So I added a sign, unless someone is bleeding, please come back in 1 hour. It became a family joke, but they respected it eventually. Walter's expression turns thoughtful, but the real change came when I started being honest about my need for solitude. I stopped apologizing for wanting time alone. I stopped acting like it was a quirk or a flaw. I need some quiet time to myself right now became a statement, not a question or a request. Michael nods. That sounds liberating. It was, Walter agrees, and once I reclaimed that space, something remarkable happened. When I did spend time with my family, I was more present, more patient, more myself. The quality of our time together improved because I wasn't secretly resenting the loss of my privacy. He leans forward. You deserve private space, Michael, a sanctuary that's just yours. Whether it's a room, a corner, or just scheduled time alone, claim it unapologetically. Michael looks thoughtful. I have a workshop in the basement I used to spend hours there making things, but lately it's become storage for everyone else's stuff. Start there, Walter encourages. Reclaim your workshop. Clear out what doesn't belong to you. Make it your sanctuary again. Michael nods, his expression shifting slightly. There's a new determination there. I could do that. Good, Walter says, satisfaction in his voice. Remember, it's not about shutting people out. It's about creating the conditions where you can truly be present when you choose to let them in. The sun has moved lower in the sky now, casting a golden glow across the rooftop terrace. The city below continues its rhythmic, but up here, in this shared space, something important is happening. A quiet revolution of reclamation. These first 4 things, mental space, the power to say no, adequate sleep and personal privacy, they're the foundation, Walter says. Once you begin to reclaim these, everything else becomes possible. Michael sits up straighter, his posture changing subtly. The defeated slump of his shoulders has lessened. There's an attentiveness, an awakening in his expression. What are the other 4? He asks. Walter shifts slightly, settling more comfortably on the bench. The early evening. Light bathes the rooftop in a golden glow as he continues. The 5th thing I couldn't afford to give up anymore was my right to change, to think differently, to want different things, to become someone new even at this stage of life. Michael tilts his head questioningly. Change? Isn't that more of a young person's game? Walter chuckles softly. That's exactly the misconception I had to overcome. For decades, I operated under the belief that by a certain age, you should be settled in your opinions, your routines, your understanding of the world. But that's not growth, Michael. That's stagnation. He leans forward, his eyes bright with conviction. After 60, I realized something profound. I was still evolving. My perspectives were shifting based on new experiences. My priorities were changing, and yet everyone around me seemed invested in keeping me exactly the same. I've felt that, Michael admits. My wife still sees me as the same man she married 40 years ago. Sometimes I don't even recognize that version of myself anymore. Walter nods emphatically. Exactly. We're expected to remain consistent. It makes us reliable, predictable for others. But that expectation becomes a cage. Please hit the subscribe button if you appreciate advice like this. It helps us create more content you can use. Back to where we were. He gazes out at the city skyline. There was a moment when I realized this clearly. For most of my adult life, I'd been politically aligned with my family and community, never questioned it. Then, in my 70s, after some personal experiences and a lot of reading, my views began to shift. Nothing extreme, just evolved. Walter shakes his head, remembering. You would have thought I'd committed a crime. My brother actually said to me, "Who are you? I don't even know you anymore," as if changing my mind was a betrayal rather than growth. How did you handle that? Michael asks, leaning forward with interest. Not well at first, Walter admits with a rueful smile. I tried to hide my evolving thoughts, to maintain the facade of being the same old Walter everyone expected. But that created a terrible disconnection within me, like living a double life. He straightens his shoulders. Eventually, I had to stand firm. I said to my brother, "I'm still me, I've just grown, and I need the freedom to keep growing even now." It was difficult. Some relationships became strained, but the alternative was denying my own authentic evolution. Michael nods thoughtfully. I understand that. There are things I believe now that would shock my younger self, and that's as it should be, Walter says firmly. Growth doesn't stop at 60 or 70 or 80. The tragedy would be to silence your evolving self to please others who prefer the outdated version they're comfortable with. He gestures expansively. Remember this, you've earned the right to change, to reconsider long-held beliefs, to develop new interests, to let go of obligations that no longer serve you. This isn't fickleness, it's wisdom. Michael seems to absorb this, nodding slowly. So how do I start reclaiming this right to change? Begin by giving yourself permission, Walter suggests. Acknowledge that your thoughts and feelings can continue to evolve. Then take one small step, express a new opinion, try a new activity, admit when you've changed your mind about something important. His eyes twinkle. And when someone says, "That's not like you," simply respond, "Actually, this is the new me. I'm still discovering who I am." Michael smiles, something lightening in his expression. I like that. The new me. Exactly, Walter affirms. Now, let's move to the sixth thing I couldn't afford to give up anymore, something that many of us have been surrendering for decades without even realizing it, our authentic voice. What do you mean by that? Michael asks. Walter leans back, his expression growing more solemn. Think about all the times you've swallowed what you really wanted to say, the discomforts you never mentioned, the hurt feelings you buried, the opinions you kept to yourself to keep the peace, the genuine reactions you suppressed to maintain harmony. Michael's face falls slightly. Too many times to count. Precisely, Walter nods. For most of our lives, we're taught that keeping quiet, not making waves, is virtuous, especially in family relationships. But after 60, I realized something critical. Silence isn't always golden. Sometimes it's just surrender. He leans forward, his voice dropping. There was a pattern in my family. Every Sunday, everyone gathered at my house for dinner. It started when the kids were young, and it just continued. Week after week, year after year. I'd spend all day cooking, cleaning, preparing. By evening, I was exhausted. Did you enjoy these dinners? Michael asks. Walter sighs. Honestly, not for many years. It had become an obligation, not a joy. But I never said anything. I smiled through my exhaustion. I pretended it was fine. What changed? Michael prompts. My health, Walter says simply. I developed heart problems. Nothing life-threatening initially, but a warning sign. My doctor asked about stress in my life, and somehow, those Sunday dinners came tumbling out, how they had become a burden, how I dreaded them each week but couldn't bring myself to say anything. He shakes his head. My doctor actually wrote me a prescription that said reclaim your Sundays and told me to put it on my refrigerator. Michael chuckles. Did that help? It gave me permission. Walter nods. The next time my daughter called, To plan Sunday dinner, I took a deep breath and said, I need to make a change. I can't do every Sunday anymore. Maybe once a month instead. Walter's expression softens. There was silence on the phone. Then she said, Dad, why didn't you tell us sooner? We had no idea it was such a strain. They were surprised, but not angry. No one withdrew their love. The world didn't end. He straightens. That's when I realized how much power I'd given away by not using my voice, by not expressing my true feelings. I'd created an unsustainable situation that was damaging my health. I've done that, Michael admits quietly. I've stayed silent about so many things that bother me. Most of us have, Walter acknowledges. But here's the truth. After 60, you can no longer afford to give up your voice. He gestures emphatically. This doesn't mean becoming argumentative or unkind. It means expressing your genuine feelings, needs, and thoughts with clarity and respect. It means saying, this doesn't work for me when it doesn't, or I feel hurt when, instead of swallowing. The pain, Michael nods, something shifting in his expression. I've never been good at that. Few of us are, Walter smiles gently. We weren't taught these skills, but it's never too late to learn them. Start small, express one authentic feeling or need this week. Notice how it feels to use your voice. Michael takes a deep breath. I think I can do that. Good, Walter says warmly. Because your voice, your authentic truth, is perhaps the most precious thing you possess. Don't surrender it to keep others comfortable. The shadows grow longer across the rooftop terrace as evening approaches. The city lights begin to twinkle below, a constellation of human activity. Walter shifts slightly, stretching his legs. Now, the seventh thing I couldn't afford to give up anymore might seem strange at first. He continues. It's the right to be alone without explanation or apology. Michael raises an eyebrow. Being alone. Is that really something people give up? More than you might realize, Walter says. Think about it. How often have you declined an invitation only to be asked, why? What else do you have going on? As if solitude itself isn't a valid choice. He gestures to the open space around them. In our society, being alone often carries a stigma, especially as we age. If you're by yourself, people assume you're lonely, isolated, or rejected. They worry. They feel sorry for you. They try to fix your aloneness. Michael nods slowly in recognition. My wife does that. If I say I want to spend an evening alone in my workshop, she immediately worries that something's wrong between us. Exactly, Walter says. And to avoid that concern, that awkwardness, we often give up our solitude. We attend gatherings we don't enjoy. We fill our calendars with social obligations. We resist the quiet moments our souls might actually be craving. He looks reflective. There was a turning point for me. After my wife passed, everyone was concerned about me being alone too much. My children, my friends, they meant well. They kept me busy, included me in everything, but in all that activity I never had space to process my grief, to redefine myself, to simply be. What did you do? Michael asks quietly. I started small, Walter explains. I began declining some invitations without elaborate excuses, just a simple thank you, but I'm taking that evening for myself. At first people push back, but you shouldn't be alone, they'd say. He smiles slightly. I had to be firm. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely, I told them. Sometimes solitude is exactly what I need. Walter leans forward. You see, after 60, time alone isn't something to fear or avoid. It's something to cherish. It's in those quiet moments that we often find our center again, hear our own thoughts clearly, reconnect with what truly matters to us. Michael looks thoughtful. I can't remember the last time I was truly alone by choice. It's always either obligations or loneliness, never deliberate solitude. Try it, Walter encourages. Claim a block of time, even just an hour to start. That's Yours alone, no explanations needed, no guilt allowed, just you, present with yourself. He smiles warmly. You might be surprised by what you discover in that quiet space. Sometimes, the most important conversation you can have is with yourself. Michael nods, something resolving in his expression. I think I'd like that. Good, Walter says with satisfaction, because you deserve that time and space. Don't give it up for anyone. The evening has fully arrived now. The city lights below, creating a sparkling tapestry against the darkening sky. Walter looks up at the first few stars becoming visible overhead. And now we come to the eighth and final thing I couldn't afford to give up anymore, he says, his voice taking on a gentler quality. Perhaps the most important of all, the simple joy of being alive. Michael tilts his head. Joy? That seems like an odd thing to give up. Walter smiles sadly. And yet, how many of us do exactly that? We postpone enjoyment. We put pleasure at the bottom of our priority list. We treat joy as a luxury we haven't earned or don't deserve. He gestures to the beautiful view before them. Think about it. When was the last time you did something solely because it brought you happiness? Not because it was productive or useful to someone else, but simply because it made your heart glad. Michael is quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure I can remember, he finally admits. That's what happened to me. Walter nods. Somewhere along the way, I became so focused on being useful, responsible, and available to others that I forgot how to simply enjoy being alive. Every activity had to have a purpose, a benefit beyond my own pleasure. His expression grows serious. But after 60, I realized something profound. Joy isn't frivolous. It's essential. Especially now, with fewer years ahead than behind, each moment of genuine delight becomes precious beyond measure. What changed for you? Michael asks softly. I was sitting right here, actually. Walter gestures to the rooftop around them. I'd come to return some books to the library. It was a day much like today. Clear skies, gentle breeze. I sat down, just to rest for a moment before heading home. He looks up at the darkening sky, and then I notice the clouds, really notice them, their shapes, their movement, the way the light played through them. For 20 minutes, I just sat and watched, did nothing else, thought of nothing else, just witnessed their beauty. Walter's face softens with the memory, and suddenly I realized I was smiling, for no reason other than the simple joy of looking. At clouds, it hit me then how rarely I allowed myself such moments of pure, purposeless pleasure. Michael is watching him intently now, something wistful in his expression. After that day, Walter continues, I made a decision. I would no longer postpone joy. I would no longer treat pleasure as something I had to earn or justify. I would reclaim the simple delight of being alive while I still could. He turns to Michael, his gaze direct and gentle. What brings you joy, Michael? Not what's useful or productive. What makes your heart light? Michael thinks for a moment. I used to love woodworking, creating something with my hands, the smell of the wood, the precision of the tools. A small smile touches his lips. I made toys for my grandchildren once, not because they needed them, just for the pleasure of creating something beautiful. When did you last do that? Walter asks. Michael's smile fades. Years ago, maybe. The workshop became storage. There was always something more important to do. More important than joy? Walter questions gently. More important than nourishing your spirit? Michael looks down at his hands. When you put it that way, after 60, Walter says firmly, joy isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. It keeps us vital, engaged with life. It reminds us why we're here at all. He leans forward. Promise me something, Michael. This week, do one thing solely because it brings you joy. No other reason needed. Whether it's returning to your workshop, or watching clouds, or listening to music you love, claim that moment of pure pleasure. Michael nods, something resolving in his expression. I will. I promise. Good. Walter says with satisfaction. Because of all the things I've mentioned today, this might be the most vital. Don't give up your right to joy. Not for anyone or anything. The night has fully settled now. The city a tapestry of lights. Below them, the rooftop terrace is quiet, peaceful, a sanctuary above the busy world. Walter and Michael sit in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating the conversation that has unfolded between them. Finally, Michael looks at Walter with new clarity in his eyes. These 8 things: mental space, the power to say no, adequate sleep, personal privacy, the right to change, your authentic voice, solitude without apology, and joy. They're all connected, aren't they? Walter nods, pleased. Yes, they are. They form a circle of self-respect, of honoring your own humanity. When you reclaim one, it becomes easier to reclaim the others. Michael takes a deep breath, straightening slightly. I've been giving these things away for so long without even realizing it. Most of us have, Walter acknowledges. We were taught that self-sacrifice was the highest virtue, especially for our generation. But there comes a point, typically around 60 or beyond, when that no longer makes sense. He places a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. It's not too late, you know, to reclaim what you've given up, to live differently from this point forward. Michael looks at him, a question in his eyes. You really think so? Walter smiles, gesturing to the vast, star-filled sky above them. As long as you're sitting on a rooftop under these stars, it's not too late. Each day is another chance to say, from now on, these things are non-negotiable. These parts of myself are no longer for sale. Michael nods, something new emerging in his posture, a subtle but unmistakable straightening of the spine, a lifting of the chin. The defeated slump has vanished. Thank you, he says simply, for sharing what you've learned. Walter waves this away modestly. I'm just passing along what I wish someone had told me years ago. These lessons came at a high cost. Maybe they don't have to for you. He stands slowly, gathering his newspaper. Same time next week. I'm usually here on Thursday afternoons. Perhaps you can tell me how reclaiming your workshop goes. Michael smiles, a genuine smile that reaches his eyes. I'd like that. As Walter turns to leave, Michael calls after him. Which one was hardest of the 8 things? Walter pauses, considering. They're all challenging in their own way, but perhaps the hardest was simply believing I deserved them in the first place. Once I understood that these weren't selfish indulgences but necessary protections, everything else became possible. Michael nods, taking this in. I'll remember that. Do, Walter says warmly. Remember that you've earned the right to protect what matters. After 60, it's not just an option, it's essential. With that, he makes his way toward the door that leads back into the library, leaving Michael sitting alone on the rooftop terrace. But it's a different kind of alone now. Not isolated or abandoned, but purposeful. The solitude of someone beginning to reclaim what has been given away for far too long. The story of Michael and Walter doesn't end with dramatic revelations or life-changing decisions made in an instant. Real change rarely happens that way, especially after decades of living a certain way. Instead, it unfolds gradually, one small choice at a time. In the weeks that followed their rooftop conversation, Michael began the quiet work of reclamation. He started with his workshop, spending one Saturday afternoon clearing out the stored items that had accumulated over years. He didn't ask permission. He didn't announce it as a project. He simply began, moving boxes, organizing tools, wiping away dust. His wife noticed, of course. What are you doing down there? She asked, pausing at the basement door. Michael looked up, his hands covered in sawdust. For a moment, the old answer formed on his lips. An explanation, a justification, perhaps even an apology for taking this time for himself. But then he remembered Walter's words. I'm reclaiming my joy, he said simply. There was a beat of surprise, then a slow nod of understanding from his wife. No argument followed, no guilt trip, just acknowledgement of something long overdue. Small steps followed. Michael began turning his phone off for 1 hour each morning, his mental space now protected like valuable property. He started saying, "Let me think about that and get back to you," instead of immediate yeses that he would later regret. When his daughter called at 11 at night with a non-emergency, he gently explained that he'd be happy to talk tomorrow, his sleep now a priority rather than an optional luxury. He closed his bedroom door when he needed quiet, without elaborate explanations, his privacy now a right rather than a privilege. There were adjustments, of course. Not everyone immediately understood or accepted these changes. There were uncomfortable conversations, moments of doubt, old habits reasserting themselves. But slowly, steadily, Michael continued the work of reclamation, not with dramatic gestures, but with quiet, consistent choices, and something remarkable happened. As he protected his mental space, he found his thoughts becoming clearer, more focused. As he guarded his sleep, his energy and patience increased. As he reclaimed his voice, expressing his true feelings, his relationships became more authentic. Most surprisingly, the people in his life didn't withdraw their love as he had feared. Some were confused initially, even resistant, but many responded with respect, even admiration. His adult son actually said, "I wish I'd seen you take care of yourself like this years ago, Dad. Maybe I wouldn't have taken you for granted so often." When Michael met Walter on the rooftop again, weeks later, there was a visible difference in him. Not a complete transformation, that wasn't the point, but a subtle straightening of the posture, a clearer gaze, a man beginning to remember who he was beneath decades of accommodation. "It's not perfect," Michael admitted as they sat watching the sunset. "I still struggle with the guilt sometimes, still find myself slipping back into old patterns," Walter nodded. "It's not about perfection, it's about direction. Are you moving toward reclaiming what matters or away from it? That's the only question worth asking." This quiet revolution of reclamation isn't just for Michael, it's for you too. Think about your own life for a moment. Which of these 8 essential things have you been giving up without even realizing it? Your mental space, constantly filled with others' needs and expectations. Your power to say no, surrendered to avoid disapproval. Your sleep, sacrificed on the altar of availability. Your privacy, invaded until no sanctuary remains. Perhaps you've given up your right to change and grow, staying frozen in outdated versions of yourself to please others. Maybe you've surrendered your authentic voice, swallowing truths that needed speaking, or relinquished your right to solitude, filling every moment with activity to avoid the stigma of being alone. And most costly of all, perhaps you've given up the simple joy of being alive, postponing pleasure, treating delight as an unearned luxury. Reclaiming them doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't require dramatic confrontations or complete lifestyle overhauls. It begins with one small choice, then another, each one a quiet declaration that from now on, certain things are non-negotiable. Start with just one of the 8 essentials. Which one resonates most deeply with you? Which sacrifice has been costing you the most? Begin there. If it's mental space you need to reclaim, create a daily period of unavailability, even 15 minutes to start. Turn off your phone, close your door. Let your mind become your own again. If it's the power to say no you need to recover, practice the pause before responding to requests. "Let me think about that" becomes your new default, giving yourself permission to check in with your own needs. First, if sleep has become optional in your life, establish a firm boundary around it. Set a non-negotiable bedtime. Make your bedroom a sanctuary. Explain to loved ones that this isn't selfishness, it's necessary self-care. If privacy feels like a distant memory, create one space that belongs only to you. A room, a corner, even a comfortable chair designated as your personal territory. Claim it unapologetically. If you've been frozen in outdated versions of yourself, give yourself permission to evolve, to think differently, to want new things. Your growth doesn't stop at 60 or 70 or beyond. If your voice has been silenced, begin expressing one authentic feeling or need each day. Start small, but start. If solitude has become something you avoid, schedule time alone without explanation or apology. Discover the richness that exists in those quiet moments with yourself, and if joy has been at the bottom of your priority list, elevate it immediately. Do one thing this week solely because it brings you happiness. No other justification needed. Remember, Walter's most important insight: the hardest part isn't implementing these changes. It's believing you deserve them in the first place. You do. You've earned this right through decades of living, giving, and growing. Now it's time to protect what matters most. Some will misunderstand this message, confusing self-respect with selfishness. Don't be deterred. Authentic generosity can only flow from a vessel that isn't depleted, from a self that is honored rather than abandoned. As Walter told Michael on that rooftop, as long as you're sitting under these stars, it's not too late. The same is true for you. Today, this very moment, can be the beginning of your own quiet revolution of reclamation. What will you no longer afford to give up? Which of these 8 essentials will you begin protecting today? The choice is yours. But remember, after 60, these aren't optional luxuries. They're necessary foundations for the dignity, purpose, and joy you deserve. The story continues, not just for Michael and Walter, but for you. One small choice at a time, one quiet act of reclamation after another. Until one day, you look back and realize that somewhere along the way, you remembered who you really are and decided that person was worth protecting. If this reflection spoke to something you've lived through, consider liking the video. It helps us share these quiet truths with others who may need them. Now tell me, what's one thing you'll do differently after watching this video? Please share with us in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.